The reading is from Isaiah chapter 6, verses 1 through 8, and is on page 553 of your Pew Bible. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lofty, and then the hem of his robe filled the temple. Seraphs were in attendance above him. Each had 6 wings. With 2 they covered their faces, and with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they flew. And one of them said to another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts, and the whole earth is full of his glory. The pivots on the thresholds shook at the voices of those who called, and the house filled with smoke. And I said, Woe is me! I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. Yet my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then one of the seraphs flew to me, holding a live coal that had been taken from the altar with a pair of tongs. The seraph touched my mouth with it and said, Now that this has touched your lips, your guilt has departed and your sin is bottled out. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send and who will go for us? And I said, Here am I, send me. Word of God, word of life. Thanks be to God.
Eli found out he was reading like 5 minutes ago. That's incredible. Good work. Uzziah. That's not a fun word to see, right? After you just find out you're going to read. Like, what? Good work. So our text for today does begin in the year that King Uzziah died. A biblical text about the transition of power. Amazing how the lectionary works sometimes, as this text was assigned, of course, years ago without a thought of coming in the aftermath of an election. Isaiah, among the greatest of all the prophets Judah had ever known, is setting up a story about God amidst a time filled with anxiety, a time filled with uncertainty, a time where lots of people were feeling fear. See, the Jewish king Uzziah had reigned in Judah for an extraordinary 52 years. In a monarchy, the transition following the death of a longtime leader oftentimes results in squabbles, to put it lightly, many times wars over who gets to be king next. A Game of Thrones, if you will. And the next king almost always gets tested by outside powers or feels the need to assert their power and dominance among their people right away. At this time in history, the Jews are just a small little tribe compared to the superpower of the day. Assyria had the largest army. Assyria had the most advanced weapons. Assyria had the greatest economy that part of the world had ever seen. And they were Judah's next door neighbor. So, how do the faithful feel at such a moment as this? God-following people, God-fearing people, faithful people. What do they do in uncertain times of transition when everybody's feeling anxious, when there's some level of uncertainty where they feel like everybody, their community, there's threats to devour what unites them. There are threats that are trying to divide them, harm their friendships, leave some awake at night worrying even. So let me tell you about a pattern that I noticed when I started voting myself in presidential elections back in the 1900s. I was a freshman in college, and I was very surprised at how negative, how personal that campaign was. I wasn't very informed about politics up to that point. After Bill Clinton won his second term in that election, I remember friends of mine that had voted for Bob Dole feeling deeply, personally hurt. They felt like their country had rejected a World War II hero who had spent a lifetime in public service in favor of someone they thought was a much lesser man. They grieved over the end of an era when the greatest generation ran the country, and for them something important had passed away. And that is the pattern that I've noticed ever since, that with each election of my life, the losing side grieves something they feel has passed away. In 2000, some of us remember that the winner in the state of Florida went undeclared for a month. 537 votes out of almost 6 million votes separated George W. Bush from Al Gore. That's an extraordinary thing to imagine, that few. After the Supreme Court ended all attempts to recount, I remember Gore supporters feeling deeply personally hurt. The legal system, they felt, had failed them. They felt that the court had chosen a political side. They grieved over the end of an era when they thought the three branches of government were remaining truly separate. Something important had passed away. And then 8 years later, the campaign between Barack Obama and John McCain. That campaign, I remember, included questions of experience and service to country and ability to lead. And when Obama won, I remember deep grief among those who felt their country had rejected established leadership from a good man in favor of wishful hoping. Many felt the country was grasping at straws instead of selecting the most qualified person. And they felt that our standards for what makes a good president were passing away. And then came 2016. That time it was an outsider and Donald Trump promising to bring his businessman efficiency and vision to what he said was the corrupt world of federal politics versus Hillary Clinton, who, of course, was very established, had served as First Lady, Senator of New York, Secretary of State. And after what I thought at the time was the most bitter campaign I'd ever see, ending with Trump winning, I remember many wondered whether decency, whether character had passed away from our politics. 4 years later, in 2020, more than 30% of Americans thought the election was stolen from Trump. Many wondered whether fair elections had passed away. And now we've all lived through another presidential cycle. And like always, the losing side feels deep grief that their country has seemingly rejected the priorities they value the most. And the truth is, our country regularly disappoints all of us, no matter who wins the elections, because it is of this world. Winston Churchill said, "Democracy is the worst form of government, except all the other forms that have been tried from time to time." Many of us, including I, would say the United States is an ingenious governmental system. And yet it is also true that our nation has always known corruption, perpetuates injustices, inflames divisions, breaks our hearts regularly. Because no matter who's in charge, a bunch of sinful people run it. And more sinful people live in it. We like to think it might be possible to make a nation that works perfectly. Like we could set up a perfect system that would work perfectly for every age, every ability, every region of the country, every ethnicity. We like to think we could create systems that leave nobody out, that national security is possible. We like to think that if we get the right people in power and have everybody rowing in the right direction, well, then we can make a perfect union, or at least more perfect. The prophet Isaiah would laugh at all that. Quite hard, I think. It's the same kind of foolish thought each of us have when we think we're able to create our own personal financial security or our own personal physical safety or some kind of perfect emotional balance. There are industries built around this belief that we can do all that ourselves, that we can somehow create personal security and safety for ourselves, but the theological response to all these ideas is very simple and very profound. Stuff happens. That's it. But if we try hard enough or are clever enough, we won't have to endure hardship, will we? We won't have illness. We won't have to dread things. Problems will land on somebody else, right? If I do life right, if I do it perfect. Because I won't then deserve stuff, right? So one of my seminary teachers said his most profound truth to teach us was that stuff happens. You know he's right. You've had stuff happen, yeah? I'm not the only one. Jesus tells a parable in the Gospel of Matthew that says as much. The idea that we are capable of creating our own security, happiness, and success, the idea that we could create a nation that never lets us down, Jesus says, everyone who hears my words and acts on them will be like a wise person who built their house on rock. The rain fell, the floods came, the winds blew, beat on that house, but it didn't fall because it had been founded on rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like a foolish person who built their house on sand. The rain fell, the floods came, the wind blew, beat against that house, and it fell, and great was its fall. Storms come. Like, that's the part that's assumed in this story. Storms happen. Stuff happens. That's a given. We try to talk each other into this wish that if we're clever enough or try hard enough, maybe we can avoid the storms. Have you ever tried to run through raindrops? It's hard to do. I still get wet. Maybe the right strategy or the right protocols will create a life without weather, where there's no wind, no rain, no floods. And then we're surprised when our fellow citizens or our leaders or our Facebook friends somehow disappoint us. Jesus' point is, the storms are going to come. Storms happen. Stuff happens. And if you want your house to remain standing through it all, you'll build your hopes on the words and good news of God, who is merciful, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love. The one who responds to the stuff of this life by enduring the worst of all the stuff himself in the person of Jesus. Build your hopes on anything else, anyone else, and when the diagnosis comes, when the election disappoints, when the friend betrays you, your house is going to wash away. The people in your life, your work, your country, all of it's worth your time and effort, but no one other than God is worth your faith. So what would Isaiah say the faithful do in uncertain times of transition, when anxiety and uncertainty and fear threaten to devour them? Well, at this difficult moment in his life, Isaiah shares a vision that he has. I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lofty. The whole scene is so grand that Isaiah feels like he should look away. He didn't feel worthy to even say anything. He's like, well, what I say is all polluted because it's me. He couldn't say or do anything in the presence of God, and God knows this, that's how Isaiah is feeling. And so God assures Isaiah he's good, he's okay. God sends a heavenly creature to Isaiah to clean his lips so that Isaiah can be confident that the words Isaiah says are worthy. That Isaiah can be confident he himself is worthy. Have you ever wondered if you're worthy of a moment or an action, something you've maybe felt called to do, but you're like, well, but I can't because it's me. Well, that's kind of where Isaiah is. And so God's like, no, how do I show him that he's worthy? Well, I'll clean his lips. How about that? And that does it. That gives Isaiah the confidence because God then says, well, whom shall I send? Who will go for us? And what God is asking, who will go for us into this broken world full of certain storms that will shake our foundations and make us question everything, into times of anxiety and into uncertainty and fear? Whom shall I send in there? And believing that God had made him able to go, Isaiah's like, here I am, send me. That is what the faithful do. They trust that God has made them worthy to meet the moment. Whether that moment is the stressful, uncertain moment after an election or a moment when a loved one or a friend needs you in ways you've never been needed before, and you're like, I don't know what to say. I don't know how to help. And then you show up and you find God gives you the words. God gives you whatever it was you needed to be helpful. Maybe it was just to sit and listen. Could be that simple. The faithful know that made clean in the waters of baptism, we are given everything we need to be sent into the stuff of this life, and that every time we're sent in, we have love to give. We have peace to share, no matter what. God called and equipped us to be sent into the world at all times, in all places, proclaiming Christ through word and deed, caring for others in the world God made, and working for justice and peace, knowing that Christ is the true King of kings. Thanks be to God. Amen. invite you to stand as we sing.